We start our story in 18th century America, a pocket of time before the Declaration of Independence, with a young proud printer called Benjamin Franklin. Franklin never quite made it to the presidency spot, but he carries a legacy of no less given his achievements. A printer by trade, he went on to become a respected polymath, a leading author, political theorist, politician, Freemason, postmaster, scientist, inventor, civic activist, statesman, and diplomat. Benjamin Franklin invented the clean-burning stove, as well as the bifocals. He proved by flying a kite that lightning was electricity, and he invented a rod to tame it, as Walter Isaacson shares in his accessible biography of the man. What's less known, however, is that he may very well have been one of the earliest proponents of the self-help industry. In his autobiography released in 1791, he revealed what he called the Moral Perfection Project, in which he conceived and chiseled himself as a canvas into the ideal version of a human he could respect. As a young man, disillusioned with religion, he developed his own manual for life. He identified 13 practical virtues which he would, week by week, practice individually and appraise by his performance. The first week there was temperance, the self-control to moderate the animalistic urges. Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Following that, there was silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid a trifling conversation. Fortunately for him, Twitter didn't exist in the 18th century. Order. Let all things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and finally, humility. Pause the video if you want to read what he wrote about each. Now, quite clearly, Franklin was highly ambitious in his expectations of his personal performance, and it makes his story all the more important for today's topic when we compare our modern struggles with his. While appraising his performance over time, Franklin found that while each virtue posed challenges, there was one that clearly stood out, and that was order. Let all your things have their places, let each part of your business have its time. He eventually decided that he was so busy and had such a good memory that he didn't need to be too orderly. Conceding defeat to the messiness of life, he resorted to rationalizing out of his predicament for the sake of his pride. He compared himself to the hurried man who goes to have his axe polished but ultimately loses patience and declares, "I think I like a speckled axe best." Think about it, not even the great Benjamin Franklin could overcome the entropy that we all guiltily spend our lives working against with a sense of obligation. The question is, could Franklin's insight reveal a certain futility with which we all create an image others can envy? Is it just a time-wasting exercise which masks us from spending our time on productive rather than repetitive administrative tasks? Are we spending our lives sweeping our patch of rock while peers build the pyramids around us? Franklin discovered a fact that many of us try to brush under the rug with superficially tidy desks, that life is fundamentally disorderly, with apparitions of apparent order. Ultimately, Franklin learned that accepting disorder, in the end, would probably be more productive than doggedly plugging a never-ending collection of holes in the boat. We're now going to look into some of the science of the proverbial messy desk, what it says about you, and how having a tidy desk can actually shut you off from opportunities that might have otherwise come your way. The inspiration for this episode came from Tim Harford, author of the great book Messy, The Power of Disorder to Transform Our Lives. With the story out of the way, we're on to part 2, science, to see what objective truths the story might highlight. But first, with an all-essential caveat. Science isn't broken, but it's a hell of a lot harder than we give it credit for, to paraphrase the data analysis blog 538. What does this mean? Well, humans are not rational creatures. Scientists are no different. We seek patterns, we unconsciously jump to conclusions, we screen data to confirm our hypotheses, and as a result struggle to replicate findings. Point is, just because I mentioned the word science doesn't mean you should take these studies as gospel. Lessons can be taken, but sleep with one eye open. Correlation is not causation. Read my favourite book in the world to understand more. Charles Lim is a neuroscientist at the University of California in San Francisco. He also happens to be a surgeon, and he also happens to be an impassioned jazz saxophonist. It's that last moniker that has directed his career into the world of messiness, and more specifically, the world of improvisation. Over the last decade, he and an increasing number of other neuroscientists have been studying the neural behaviour of improvisation in the brain. A once quite magical, uniquely human flourish reduced to the output of an fMRI scanner. manner. So what did they find? Technical hurdles of performing jazz improvs while laying horizontal in a radioactive donut notwithstanding, a curious finding was made. In one study, Charles Lim and his colleague Alan Braun recruited 6 leading jazz pianists to improvise brief pieces of music while having their brain activity logged. It was assumed that the region of the brain which represents our most complex thoughts and behaviour, the prefrontal cortex, would be more active during improvisation, the region responsible for our sense of humour, our understanding of sarcasm, our social navigation. More than that, it's put simply the command centre of the brain, and it's thought to be the cornerstone of consciousness. So it was with great surprise that Lim and Braun discovered that the frontal cortex registered less activity when subjects were improvising. The only explanation was that it was as if the brakes had ceased to function. The inhibitory actions of the brain had kind of switched off. It begins to make a little more sense when we learn that free will isn't so much about driving behaviour as it is about preventing behaviour. Neuropsychologist Benjamin Libet labelled it free won't, or more formally, the power of veto. The command centre of the brain, it turns out, is not so much responsible for commands as it is for deciding which commands are carried out in behaviour and which are stopped before we carry them out. Commands, simply put, are typically processed more unconsciously in the brain as dictated by the environment around us, and they are innumerable and unrelenting. And yet, when the frontal cortex is functioning at full capacity, we have apparent self-control, given that we're able to put on the brakes to the stream of compulsive commands being processed unconsciously. But when there is less activity in the frontal cortex, that's when our behaviour is less controlled. It can be dangerous, but it can also be empowering, manifesting someone in a culmination of all that you've learned in the past weeks, months, years that isn't as immediately available to your conscious mind as it is to your unconscious mind. We react very fast to stimuli around us, faster than the slower conscious brain can keep up with. Behavioural economist Daniel Kahneman simplifies them as System 1 and System 2, the fast, automatic and intuitive System 1, and then the slower, more analytical mode of System 2, where reason can dominate. And this is for good reason. Our ancestors lived in a state of constant threat from competing tribes, hungry lions, confused zebra. If we took the time to ruminate the approaching saliva-soaked jaws pouncing from the foliage, we probably wouldn't have YouTube today, or BBC News for that matter. It was as if the tidy desk was allowed, if only for a moment, to become a messy desk, a daring freefall caught in a crossfire of wildcard circuitry in the brain, corresponding to 10,000 hours of every bodily action ever associated with playing the piano. Familiar scales once performed with an inhibited, mundane repetitiveness suddenly crossbred into original soundbite hybrids. Without the brakes, we get a fruit salad, where there was only orange juice before. Without the command centre, everything is thrown into the stew, as if last night's dinner represents everything we've ever done in life which made an impression, conscious or not. Improvisation on command reveals a faith in one's ability, which may not be so easy to master, but more importantly, it shows a faith in jumping forth with the belief that the upside can be greater than the down. Win big, lose small, if you play your cards right. I like those odds. In fact, it's not unusual for the tidy command centre to sabotage what we know we need to do. As neuroscientist David Eagleman explains in his book Incognito, almost the entirety of what happens in your mental life is not under your conscious control. And the truth is, it's better that way. Consciousness can take all the credit it wants, but it is best left at the sidelines for most of the decision making that cranks along in your brain. When it meddles in details it doesn't understand, the operation runs less effectively. Once you begin deliberating about where your fingers are jumping on the piano keyboard, you can no longer pull off the piece. So what does this mean for your desk, sitting right there in front of you looking way too organised? Do any of these insights translate into an action we can take right now to get more stuff done and to attract more opportunity into our life, more serendipity? Well, yes, actually. I'm glad you asked. To be clear, a messy desk will not help you finish administrative tasks quicker. A to-do list and discipline will help you with that. Possibly a tidy desk too, because the conditions are known. What a messy desk can help with though is epiphanic insights, ideas that couldn't be anticipated beforehand. But bigger than this is using the messy desk concept as a broader analogy. Apply the messy desk to other areas of your life. Where in your life are you too regimented, too autopilot? Throw a spanner in the works to force original thought, and from that, original insight. Understand too that there may be areas of your life where messiness is bad. Your jogging habit should be kept as simple and automated as possible. In fact, any administrative task which is by definition repeated should embrace the tidy and the minimal. The messy desk is for creation. The messy desk is for experimentation. The messy desk is symbolic of the world as it is, beyond superficial facades and keeping up appearances. It saves us from the hubris of ego by acknowledging that we don't have all the information. Bigger than even this though, the tidy desk is the world of yesterday, where employment meant repetitive tasks, the industrial conveyor belt without machines to do the mind-numbing work. We're now moving into the creative age. Everything the tidy desk can give you is found through Google. What your messy desk can unearth exists only in your brain today. A spaghetti junction of circuitry just waiting to cross paths if only the brakes can relent for long enough so that light might enter. And this is something we all might consider. No matter how impervious you think you might be to playing it safe, the brain has a tendency to stick to solutions it already knows rather than look for potentially superior options. It's known as the Einstellung effect, and we're all affected by it. The brain is a conservative resource allocator. The path of least resistance typically takes the cake without dedicated conscious effort. If you want to be more creative, you might just want to become a little bit more messy. If you enjoyed today's episode, why not consider purchasing one of the books that inspired today's show? It helps the authors who write, me who produces, and you who implements. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts below, strike a like, and if you're feeling really daring, hover over the subscribe button and see what happens.